Let's start the day off right with some really interesting news. I don't really know if news is the right word, but this is a little tidbit of information that Elliotte Friedman shared a few days ago. Yeah, this is from a few days ago. I'm not actually on time with this. This is from the weekend on the Hockey Night in Canada panel, where Elliotte Friedman was commenting about these two NHL teams that we're going to be discussing today, the Vancouver Canucks and the Montreal Canadiens, my number one and my number two favorite hockey teams. This tweet from Habs Links kind of sums up everything that Elliotte Friedman was talking about, so let's just read it over here. Elliotte Friedman on Hockey Night in Canada reporting that the Canadiens considered acquiring Sven Baertschi from the Vancouver Canucks before signing Ilya Kovalchuk. Obviously, they ultimately decided they couldn't make it work. So, this is kind of how we frame the timeline. The Vancouver Canucks and the Montreal Canadiens were in a pretty noteworthy discussion wherein Sven Baertschi would be moved from the Vancouver Canucks to the Habs. Actually, not from the Vancouver Canucks, I meant to say from the Utica Comets to the Habs. Now, why exactly would the Montreal Canadiens want to do this in the first place? Well, because Sven Baertschi is, in my opinion, a legitimate NHL winger, who, if you've been following the channel and you've been watching the videos that we made about Sven Baertschi, you'd know he's a winger that's not necessarily been in the best position to succeed, mostly because the Vancouver Canucks have a few good top six wingers, and they don't necessarily have the room for Baertschi in their top six. Baertschi is not a player that the Vancouver Canucks were comfortable in playing in their bottom six in a defensive role. Because this is a quick player, he's an agile player, he's a player who gets his hockey value from scoring points. He's not an Antoine Roussel, he's not a Tyler Mott, he's not a Tim Schaller, he's not one of these guys who can slot into the bottom six, grind things out, win those puck battles, be a penalty kill guy, and take defensive zone draws, and be effective that way. Sven Baertschi is a more offensive guy. That's why the Vancouver Canucks ultimately sent him down to Utica, because they thought that him being in Utica and having these defensive guys in the bottom six would be more beneficial to the Canucks than having a Sven Baertschi in the bottom six. But regardless on how you define the philosophy, Sven Baertschi is to me an NHL forward, and he is a player who could play in the NHL in most NHL teams' middle six. And he's a guy who has had a history of concussions, which does lead to some insecurities when it comes to teams and their willingness to take him on and go with him full time. But the reason the Montreal Canadiens were interested in Baertschi is because, hey, Gallagher, he's out. Byron, he's out. Drouin, he's out. When it comes to the Montreal Canadiens and their forwards, what they need is a forward who could help them offensively. Sven Baertschi is a guy who could come in, slot in on a line with Nick Suzuki, and boom, you got some magic going on right there. As a Canucks fan and a Habs fan, I would have loved to see that. That scenario where the Vancouver Canucks trade Sven Baertschi to the Habs is a win-win-win. It's a win for the Canucks because they get an asset in return from Montreal, albeit it would probably be a small asset, but an asset nonetheless that would help the team out in the future. That would be more valuable to the Canucks than Sven Baertschi, because Sven Baertschi foreseeably won't be helping the Vancouver Canucks out in the future on their roster. Any form of an asset that they get has the opportunity to do so. So it's a win for the Canucks that way. It's a win for the Habs because they acquire their winger that they've been looking for. Sure, they have to give a price, but the Canadiens are in a position where they have so much future stock in prospects and picks and all that, that to me it would make a little bit of sense to sacrifice maybe even the smallest piece for a piece that can help out now. It will be a win for them because they can get that winger and they can replace Gallagher, Byron, and Drouin. Obviously, not all at once, and I'm not going to say that he's going to replace their entire production, but fill in a spot in the lineup that does have a hole. And finally, it will be a win for Sven Baertschi too, because who wants to play in the AHL when you have the chance and the skills to play in the NHL? I think he has the skill. He's not being utilized that way in Vancouver, but if he was in Montreal, I know for sure he'd be getting that shot. So that would have been a win-win-win situation, but the Canadiens ultimately go with Kovalchuk, the guy who is free. And what we have here is a lose-lose-win situation. It's a loss for the Vancouver Canucks because they still have Baertschi, who is not going to help this team out in the future, and rather than having an asset for him, they just have him. Sure, he's doing great with the Comets, but in the perspective of the Vancouver Canucks strictly, Baertschi is not doing anything right now, and I don't think things are going to change down the line. It's a loss for Sven Baertschi too because the guy's staying in the AHL. Why the heck would you want to be there when you're good enough to be playing in the NHL? And as for the Habs, I guess it's a win. That's why I said it's a loss-win situation, because the Habs still get their winger. Kovalchuk is free. Pretty much, he didn't cost an asset, and you're not paying him in the next year. You're only paying him up until the end of this year, so things are looking really good for the Canadiens on that front. But to me, it was really interesting to see Elliotte Friedman just bring up the idea of a Sven Baertschi trade between the Canucks and the Canadiens, obviously because they're my top two favorite teams, but because I understand it from both sides, and in fact, I understand it from Baertschi's side as well. When it comes to Sven Baertschi, I hope that the guy finds an NHL home someday. I don't think that's with Vancouver, but hey, if it is, then great. If it is with Vancouver, that means that he's found himself a way to surpass the guys that we have on our team in general, and in turn, that means that he gets better, right? Because if he's not playing now, and he's playing down the line, that means that there is improvement. I don't see a guy like Tanner Pearson, or a JT Miller, or a Brock Besser becoming significantly worse to the point where a Baertschi call-up would be better than having them, right? That makes no sense to me. But even if it's not with Vancouver, I hope Sven Baertschi finds an NHL home. The guy deserves it. The guy has been injured for far too long throughout his career, but he still has the skills. He's a great AHL guy with the Utica Comets, and he's over there tearing things up with Goldolbin and Boucher and Cole Lind and Lucas Jacek and all these really good Utica Comets forwards that we have. So when it comes to our Swiss boy that we acquired from the Calgary Flames all those years ago, I hope the best for his NHL future. However, though, it's unfortunate to me that it's probably not going to be with Vancouver. And hey, to anybody who's asking about a potential return for Sven Baertschi in a trade-like scenario, because obviously, because we're talking about it here, we kind of do have to assess the damage that would be done to a team's assets if they were to trade for a Sven Baertschi-like player. Spoiler alert, it's really not going to be much. Baertschi's on a $3.366666 million cap hit for the end of this year and next year. And if there's any team that's going to want to bite on that for a player who is playing in Utica right now, they're not going to be willing to give up more than a late pick or a not seemingly too great of a prospect. I'm not too sure. Now, if it was Sven Baertschi from, I don't know, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, the guy who got 35 points in 68 games in 2016-17, then maybe we have ourselves a trade that actually gets somewhere. But right now, we're dealing with a Sven Baertschi who's played 26 games last season, and he's really not up to the same form that 18 goals in 2016-17 would probably predict. He's gone through a few concussions, and he's gone through a lot of stuff. I personally still think he's skilled enough to be an NHL winger, but what do I think? Other NHL teams aren't going to think the same as me, that's just how it works. So, if the Montreal Canadiens were to give up something here, I'm only understanding it from their point of view because I know they have a ton of picks and they have a ton of prospects, so getting rid of one of their assets doesn't seem like too far of a fetch. But if you're taking a look at the rest of the league, not everybody's got those assets that the Canadiens have. So when Elliotte Friedman talked about this on air, I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. It really does make sense from both sides. You know, being a fan of both of these teams and all. But ultimately, it doesn't happen. Kovalchuk is a Hab, and Sven Baertschi is most likely going to end up elsewhere in the NHL when he eventually does come back, because I do believe that he will have an NHL future once again. Hope you enjoyed this video, and Bye.